Cloud Retainer, or should I say Xianyun, has had the most character development out of all of the playable characters. Introduced in 1.0 as a burb, then we learn that she holds a secret about Ganyu and Shenhe's cute past, as well as her history with Madame Ping. Now, suddenly, 4 years later, she's a playable character? Man, she really had a swift turnaround. She will now grace us with her presence with a new game style, Plunge Gaming. Xianyun is made for Plunge teams. If you try to use her anywhere else, she is a direct downgrade. But how good does she make Plunge teams? And how does she enable weaker characters? Let's start by talking about Xianyun's elemental skill. She would generate about 4 particles, which is pretty good. She could jump 3 times in the air and then drop a tactical nuke onto the enemy. You can also choose to end her skill early, but you'll get a little less damage. In combination with her talents, this will grant up to a 10% crit rate buff for plunge attacks for the entire team. This also includes the bonk on the way down with Plunge. This also depends on how many enemies are hit. So, in a single target situation, this buff is only a mere 4% crit rate. Luckily, it does last 20 seconds. The movement on the skill isn't too great when compared to other characters, especially the likes of Wanderer, because the control is just not up to par. Not as precise as we're used to anyways. It's still fine for gliding around the map, I guess. Her burst, however, is where the magic happens. She will heal your entire team by a fair bit, and then she will create a field, well, not really a field because it of course follows you, that allows about 8 plunges and they'll be greatly buffed. And it allows any character to perform a plunge attack. When you land a plunge, she will also unleash an area of effect animo attack, which can heal a bit and help with swirls. The damage buff to the plunge attack is actually kind of massive. The trade-off is, it only works for one enemy. Yeah, you heard that right. It works against one enemy despite being an area of effect plunge attack. This isn't the end of the world, as she will be able to greatly buff the damage against one target. And the thing about plunge attacks is they have really high damage multipliers for every character, especially when compared to normal and charge attacks. So this isn't too bad, but it really makes me wonder, why only against one target? This opens up teams for the likes of characters who can infuse their attacks or make use of C6 Bennett, because vaping and even better, melting those plunge attacks can be massive. Characters like Xianyun and Diluc get massive buffs on Xianyun because their gameplay can really ease in those plunge attacks easily. Everyone else though, doesn't really get that much better. Hu Tao can make use of it, sure, and of course Xiao can really take advantage of the plunge buff, but remember it's only against one target. Xiao still benefits a fair bit though, as long as the buff plunge hits the right target, while Hu Tao, you're really only using her in single target teams anyway, so this can actually be a significant increase. So this brings up the dilemma of Cloud Retainer. Her buff is entirely focused around buffing plunge attack and against one enemy. Because of this, she lacks all of her utility in other teams that just don't care about plunges. If you're not plunging, you lose her constant animo damage, every buff with her 2 passives, and also the residual healing. She's a real niche 5-star who could buff a few characters really well, but only those few. This isn't a bad thing though. Technically, she will find a place on people's account who have units who can use her, like Xiao, Hu Tao, Diluc Gaming, and Xianyun, and maybe more characters in the future. Who knows? Maybe Notland will release a stream of plunge attackers, but I really wouldn't count on it. Now, a lot of people are thinking about Raiden, and as it stands, Xianyun provides literally nothing to Raiden. Raiden is a character whose burst damage is considered, well, burst damage. So her plunging in her burst is not a plunge, it's burst damage. So this most likely will not be buffed unless they make some last minute changes to suit Raiden. Her pool of characters that synergize with her is very limited. She can find her place in any team alongside Farina and C6 Bennett though, since any melee character can infuse Pyro, and that means you can get massive Pyro vapes with Farina. You remember the early days of Genshin when you see a character doing 1 million damage in bounties? Well, you can have a fraction of that power with this setup. Let's talk about her artifacts and weapons before we continue into more Xianyun concepts. For artifacts, she's Animo. Just use 4-piece Viridescent, bro. But, in reality, she can also use the new set introduced this patch, Song of the Days Pass. She's really able to utilize the buff to your team by 8% of their damage, but really, stick to Viridescent. The Shred is much more valuable, unless you're running 2 Animo units, the other of course having the Viridescent set. You'll want to focus on energy recharge and attack stats, because her Plunge scales off of her total attack like Shenhe, and if her burst isn't active, she's really not contributing to the team's overall damage output. Unless you're running her with Favonius, you probably want to go energy recharge, attack percent, but you can go with any combination of attack percent and energy recharge to suit your needs. If you're struggling to burst every rotation, then you'll want to go for more ER until that condition is met. Then, stack attack. For her weapons, you have many options. The good old Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer is a fine option to further buff your main carry, but I'd recommend going in ER weapons so that you can bring her attack up to par with the substats from the artifacts. Weapons like Favonius Codex or the limited weapon Oathsworn Eye is really good in this case. I'd recommend a utility weapon over going full attack because her damage output just isn't impressive. Now, let's talk about her signature weapon. It's really good. And it's insane that this passive wasn't her Ascension passive instead. This weapon grants your team a 28% plunge damage increase whenever they use your skill, and guess what? It works against all targets. She also gets back 2.5 energy for every plunge that your party members do. That's a 20 energy refund if used correctly. This is one of the most overtuned 5-star weapons, and it's horrible that this is their solution to fix the problems with their kit. Do I recommend getting this weapon? Hell no. Is it good? Yeah, it's pretty good. If you want Nahida's weapon as well, go for it. I have Nahida's weapon, and while it isn't the best signature weapon in Genshin, it's pretty nice to have. The weapon banner is cursed, however. By the way, here's a Requiem that's linked right above here. It's a good song, by the way. You should check it out. This does bring her energy recharge to essentially requiring 50 energy, which eliminates most needs for an ER Sans. You can rely on ER from substats, especially if you use her with Xiao. Sadly, this weapon really only works for her. How many Catalyst users do you know that could use a plunge attack without external help? Now, let's talk briefly about her Constellations. Her C1 gives her an additional charge on her skill. This helps a bit with her energy, but you don't really want to be spamming her skill to begin with since it takes quite a while to get off. Luckily, you can just do one hop and plunge twice and get a great amount of energy, so that's an option at least. Her C2 takes the already massive buff to plunge attacks and doubles it. But again, against one target. Why, Hoyo? Why? Her C4 lets her skill heal all allies, but for $800, I mean, it's not really worth it. Her C6 turns her into a C6 Xiao without the requirements of needing to hit at least 2 enemies. She can spam her skill for days. When she uses her burst, her skill will not only have no cooldown for the next 16 seconds, but she'll also get a 70% crit damage buff if you use all 3 steps of her skill. So that's 8 plunges back to back to back, and that can be pretty fun. I wouldn't really recommend any Constellations for Cloud Retainer though, as they're really just quality of life until C6, where she becomes a main DPS who can pump out insane damage. Her C2 does buff the on-field plunger greatly, but again, only against one target. All in all, Xianyun will be good where she's supposed to be, buffing plunge attackers. While she will be great in those teams, she can't even be considered a Jean side grade anymore, as she is the downgrade in every other team that does it like plunges. So if you want to embrace the plunge meta, then Xianyun will be a solid pickup, but she will be considered a luxury unit like Shenhe. Remember, at the end of the day, waifu over meta. If you like Cloud Retainer, then pull for her, as she will serve you well. Just come to terms with the fact that for meta purposes, plunges is the way to go. If you don't care about the meta, then you're good either way. Still here? Great. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, as only about 5% of you all are actually subscribed to my channel. We managed to reach our goal of 3%, and we even surpassed it and got 5%, but that's still kinda low, right? Go ahead and like this video and subscribe for more future content like this, as well as many other things.